My wife abandoned me and our newly born daughter and went away with her lover. She said, "You are too poor to father a child. I can't suffer with you." During our daughter's graduation, she acknowledged my ex-wife and her lover as her favorite people who helped her through law school. She never mentioned my name. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Perry Andrews from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I still remember the smell of antiseptic and formula in that hospital room. The kind of sterile sorrow that clings to your clothes and doesn't wash out. The nurses had left, the machines had quieted, and there I was, sitting in a plastic chair with my newborn daughter in my arms and no one else in the room. My wife, Claire, had given birth just 48 hours earlier, and now she stood by the window with her coat draped over one arm and her purse clenched tight under the other. Her eyes weren't on me or the baby. They were on the skyline beyond the hospital parking lot, as if she were already halfway gone. "I can't do this," she muttered, barely loud enough for me to hear. I asked her what she meant, already knowing. She didn't flinch when she said it. "You're too poor to father a child. I won't suffer through life with you." That was it. No breakdown, no tears. Just an announcement, cold and clean like a boardroom memo. She kissed our daughter on the forehead without meeting my eyes and walked out the door. The latch clicked shut like a coffin ceiling. I didn't cry, not right away. I sat there staring at this tiny life in my arms, her little fists twitching in her sleep, unaware that her mother had just abandoned us both. The silence in the room felt louder than a scream. The truth is, part of me had been waiting for this. Claire had grown distant during the pregnancy, spending more weekends with friends and taking longer and longer to respond to texts. I saw the signs. Hell, I even smelled another man's cologne on her once. But I thought she'd come around. I thought the baby would change things. People always say children bring couples together. But that's a lie. Sometimes, a child just exposes the cracks you've been ignoring. I looked down at my daughter, and despite everything, despite my broken heart, my rage, the financial ruin I knew was waiting for me, I felt love. Not the soft, gentle kind. The fierce, protective kind that makes you want to fight the world just to give someone a better shot. By the time I brought Lena home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a stranger's place. Every corner reminded me of Claire. The smell of her shampoo in the bathroom, the shoes she left by the door, the half-finished painting she had started in the dining room. I couldn't bring myself to move her things right away. It was as if I were waiting for her to come back, apologize, and say it was all a mistake. But the days turned into weeks, and all I got was one lawyer-drafted letter asking me to sign custody papers. Full custody. As if that were some consolation prize. I didn't reply. I didn't even open it fully. I just slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk and locked it away. I wasn't going to beg someone to be a mother. Lena deserved better than that. Raising a newborn alone while working odd shifts at a hardware warehouse wasn't just hard, it was soul-grinding. I was tired in a way no sleep could fix. I was afraid every day, terrified I'd drop her, that I'd mix the formula wrong, that I'd mess her up with my sadness. I made mistake after mistake. Once I forgot to burp her, and she cried for 2 hours straight. Another time I microwaved the bottle too hot, and felt like a monster for even trying. I needed help, and not just part-time babysitting. I needed someone with a heart. That's when I met Elena. She was recommended by an older coworker at the warehouse, someone whose kids she used to care for. She doesn't just watch children, he told me. She loves them like they're her own. I was skeptical. I didn't want another woman coming in and pretending to fix what Claire had broken. But from the moment Elena walked into our lives, it was different. She didn't pity me. She didn't try to mother me. She just took Lena in her arms like it was the most natural thing in the world and hummed a lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a kid. Elena was in her early 30s then, with quiet eyes and strong hands, strong from years of lifting babies and holding families together that weren't hers. She moved into the second bedroom and became part of our daily rhythm. She cooked, cleaned, and most importantly, she listened. On nights when Lena wouldn't sleep, We'd take turns pacing the floor with her. Sometimes, we'd end up sitting across from each other in the dim light of the living room, sharing stories we'd never told anyone else. I told her about Claire, how quickly she'd changed, how fast love turned into a transaction. Elena told me about losing her mother young, about how caretaking became second nature. There was never a romantic spark in those early years, no dramatic tension, just a shared respect, an unspoken partnership, two people doing the hard work of keeping a child warm and fed and loved. The years passed quietly, but not easily. I worked harder than I thought was humanly possible. First the warehouse, then side gigs repairing appliances, then eventually managing my own small repair business. Elena kept the home steady. Lena grew up fast, crawling before I was ready, walking before I could baby-proof the furniture, asking questions I didn't always have the answers to. And through it all, I made a silent promise. I would build a life for her that no one could walk out of. That became my purpose. Every decision, every sleepless night, every dollar saved was for her. I missed birthdays, yes. I missed dance recitals and field trips. But I was building something, brick by painful brick, that she could one day stand on without fear. I didn't expect a medal. I just hoped she'd see it. And sometimes she did. I remember one morning when she was 6. I was packing up tools for an early job, barely awake, and she ran up to me with a drawing, stick figures holding hands, a little girl between a tall man and a woman with long hair. "This is you, me, and Elena," she said proudly. "My real family." I choked on my own breath. That picture lived on my workbench for years. I held on to moments like that because they reminded me that maybe I wasn't just paying the bills. Maybe I was making something that mattered. But deep down, I always feared the day Claire would come back. Not because I missed her, I didn't. That door was closed the moment she left. I feared she'd come back and fill Lena's head with stories, rewrite the past, take credit for years she didn't suffer through. I feared Lena would want the fantasy over the truth. People do that. They romanticize absence, worship the ones who weren't there because they never had to see the flaws. Elena told me not to worry. She believed love built day by day was stronger than any apology 15 years late. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. But I also knew the world didn't work like that. People look at success and assume it tastes like champagne and victory speeches. But for me, it tasted like takeout reheated at 2 a.m. and the stale exhaustion of always being 10 minutes late for everything that mattered. I spent 2 decades chasing something I wasn't even sure I wanted: money, recognition, power, not because I was greedy, but because I was terrified. Terrified that if I didn't build something unshakable, I'd be seen the way Claire saw me the day she walked out. Small, broke, forgettable. I wasn't just trying to succeed. I was trying to erase the man she left behind. And in the process, I missed more moments than I care to count. Elena would send me videos of Lena's school plays, of birthday candles blown out in front of neighborhood kids, of her first time riding a bike. And though I smiled watching them, there was always this hollow ache in my chest, because I wasn't in any of them. I was just the man behind the curtain, writing checks and grinding gears while someone else got to hear her laugh. I never blamed Elena. She became what I couldn't: present. She braided Lena's hair in the mornings, helped her with math homework, kissed her forehead before bed. It wasn't just caretaking. It was love in the daily, thankless form that no one sees unless they're looking. And Lena loved her for it, called her Laney, in that affectionate way kids do when they don't have the words for how much someone means to them. Sometimes, I felt like a guest in my own home, watching their bond from a distance I created. But I told myself it was for the greater good. I was building a legacy, something my daughter could inherit, something that would shield her from the financial traps and humiliations I'd known too well. I opened 3 businesses by the time I turned 55, 2 succeeded, 1 failed. I reinvested, learned, adapted. People in the city started to know my name, not just as a repairman, but as a builder, a leader. I made the 40 over 40 business list. I shook hands with mayors and CEOs. And yet, every time I came home to a quiet house and a dark kitchen, I wondered if I was just decorating the walls of a life no one lived in. It was during Lena's high school years that Claire came back into the picture. Not with an apology, not with humility, but with photo-perfect smiles and expensive gifts wrapped in guilt. She and her lover, now husband, had made a name for themselves in tech investments, and suddenly, they had time for the daughter she'd once discarded like last season's purse. I remember the first time Lena came home with a bracelet her mother had given her, real silver, engraved with "To my baby girl." She beamed as she showed it to me, unaware of how my stomach twisted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she remembered the woman who walked out before her umbilical cord was even healed. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "It's beautiful, honey." Because what else can you do when the past knocks on your door dressed like a fairy godmother? Over the next few years, I watched as my daughter was slowly pulled into a story where her mother had been misunderstood, too young, too scared, but always loving. I didn't fight it. I just kept showing up. I kept paying tuition, sitting in the bleachers at her soccer games, writing letters of recommendation, and nodding politely at school events when Claire and her husband strutted in like royalty. Elena would squeeze my hand sometimes when she saw the pain behind my eyes, and I'd squeeze back, both of us silently grieving a child we were slowly losing to a false narrative. Lena wasn't cruel, just young, eager to believe that no one meant to hurt her, that her mother's absence had been circumstantial, not intentional. And maybe I envied her for that optimism, because by then, I'd long stopped trying to believe in second chances that weren't earned. Law school came next, and I couldn't have been prouder. Lena was brilliant, sharp, articulate, and tenacious in a way that reminded me of the younger version of myself I'd buried beneath work and worry. I paid her tuition in full, bought her a used car, even paid for her off-campus housing. Not because she asked, but because I wanted her to know there was always someone in her corner, someone who never left. I didn't expect thank you speeches or Instagram shout-outs. I just wanted her to see me, to understand, at least in some corner of her heart, what it cost me to give her everything I never had. But the closer graduation came, the more distant she seemed. We spoke less. Our calls became functional. She sounded more like a professional than a daughter, polite, courteous, and emotionally absent. I should have seen it coming, but denial is a hell of a cushion. It lets you fall gently into hope, only to drop you when the truth hits. The night before her graduation, I walked past her open suitcase and saw a framed photo on top of her clothes. Claire, her husband, and Lena at some vineyard, laughing like a family with no jagged edges. There wasn't a single photo of me in her room. Not one. Elena tried to comfort me, said maybe she packed it already. But we both knew better. You don't forget the people you want to remember. I spent that night going through old emails, school receipts, tuition invoices, gift confirmations, doctor appointment reminders. Proof of presence. Proof that I had been there. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to convince myself I hadn't imagined the last 20 years. That I hadn't been nothing more than a glorified ATM with a beard and a business portfolio. The next morning, I put on my best suit, sat in the front row of that auditorium, and waited to hear her name called, heart pounding like a man on trial. And when she walked across that stage, radiant and confident, I felt a pride that momentarily eclipsed all the pain. But then she stepped up to the podium to give her brief acknowledgement speech, and that pride shattered like glass under a steel heel. "I want to thank the two people who truly stood by me all these years," she said, voice steady. "My mother and my stepfather, who supported me emotionally, lifted me up, and reminded me of my worth. I couldn't have done this without you." I sat frozen. Not angry, not sad, just erased. Not even a vague mention. Not even a nod. When the applause died down, I clapped too. Because what else do you do when your daughter forgets you on the most important day of her life? It's strange how pain doesn't always show up with thunder and fury. Sometimes, it tiptoes in so quietly that you don't even realize it's there until it's sitting right next to you, whispering all the ways you've failed. That's how I felt sitting in that auditorium, still clapping like a fool long after the applause had died down. My hands felt numb, and not just from the motion. My ears rang, not from the crowd's cheers, but from the vacuum her words left behind. No acknowledgement, no mention, not even a vague, "Thank you to the people who helped me along the way." Just her mother and the man who walked into her life 15 years late and wore the title of father like a costume he picked up on sale. And there I sat, front row, custom suit, camera in hand, reduced to nothing but a forgotten guest at a party I paid for. When the ceremony ended, people flooded the lawn outside, snapping pictures, throwing hats in the air, hugging like their lives had finally started. I stood still for a moment, not ready to move. Elena gently touched my arm, her eyes soft with concern. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, but it wasn't true. Something inside me had shifted, something vital had cracked. I'd always known I wasn't her favorite parent. Hell, maybe I was never in the running. But I didn't expect to be erased entirely. When Lena finally found us in the crowd, she hugged Elena first. "Lainey, you came," she said, beaming. And then, as if I were an afterthought, she turned to me. "Hey, Dad," she added casually, like we were acquaintances at a work mixer. I forced a smile, handed her the gift I'd wrapped myself, a vintage law book with her name embossed in gold. She barely looked at it before tucking it under her arm and posing for more pictures. We drove home in silence. Elena tried to fill the air with small talk, but I barely responded. Lena was too busy on her phone, probably texting Claire about dinner plans or uploading photos of her big day. I stared out the window, watching the world blur by, wondering how I got here, how 20 years of sacrifice translated to this emptiness sitting in my chest like wet cement. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into the garage and sat on the old recliner I kept near my workbench, the one Lena used to sit on while pretending to help me fix things when she was little. I ran my fingers over the worn leather and thought about all the nights I spent building her future while the rest of the world slept. I gave her everything, my time, my money, my youth. And somehow, I became invisible in the process. The next morning, I asked her to sit with me at the kitchen table. She looked surprised, maybe even a little annoyed, like I was interrupting her post-graduation glow. Elena stood near the sink, silently wiping down a clean counter, pretending not to listen. I cleared my throat. "I want to talk about your speech yesterday." Lena raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "You thanked your mother and her husband. That's fine. But you didn't mention me. Not once." Her face tightened instantly. "Oh my God, are you seriously upset about that?" she said, laughing bitterly. "It wasn't that deep." I kept my voice even. "It was a public acknowledgement of who you believe shaped your life. And I wasn't even worth a passing mention." She crossed her arms, defensive. "You helped me financially. That was your job. They were there for me emotionally. They cared." The words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at her, stunned into silence. "That was my job," I repeated slowly, trying to process what she'd just said. "To pay bills and disappear?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't twist it. I'm grateful. But let's not pretend you were this involved. Hands-on, Dad. You missed every recital, every birthday, every parent-teacher night. Lainey was there. Mom and Jay were there. You weren't." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the damn table and tell her about the nights I worked 20-hour days just to afford her tuition. About the times I fixed strangers' air conditioners in freezing weather because she needed braces. But I didn't. I just sat there, a man who suddenly felt too old, too tired, too broken to explain himself to someone who had already made up her mind. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "He wasn't there because he was building your future. Every night he missed, every event he couldn't attend, it was because he was making sure you never went without. You think love is just presence? Love is sacrifice. And he bled for you, Lena." My daughter didn't respond. She just stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked out of the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, and in that moment, I knew something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a heartfelt conversation. This was years of emotional distance, misinterpretation, and silence that had calcified into resentment. And I was done apologizing for being the man who carried the weight so she could float. I spent the rest of the week avoiding her. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed space. I needed clarity. And somewhere between those long walks around the block and late-night talks with Elena, I realized I didn't have to keep proving myself. I didn't have to keep begging to be seen by someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. I had paid the price. I had done the job. And now, I was allowed to walk away. The realization didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like a final exhale after holding your breath for too long. The following Sunday, Lena packed up and left without saying goodbye. I heard her car pull out of the driveway while I was in the garden, watering the tomatoes. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call. I just stood there, hose in hand, watching the dust settle behind her. Elena came outside and stood beside me. "You okay?" she asked again. This time I was honest. "No. But I will be." She nodded and slipped her hand into mine. We stood there in silence, two people who had given everything and asked for so little in return. 3 months passed. Not a text, not a call, just silence. A silence so complete it stopped feeling like punishment and started to feel like peace. At first, I checked my phone constantly, expecting some kind of follow-up, maybe an apology, maybe a message asking if we could talk. Anything that suggested my daughter had replayed our last conversation and seen the hole she punched through me. But no, my phone stayed quiet. I stopped waiting around the second week, deleted her graduation photos from my lock screen, and replaced them with a picture Elena had taken of us at a lakeside cabin last fall. Just me and her, sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the fog roll in like it had nowhere else to be. That photo started to feel like home, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. No performance, no distance, just two people who chose each other without conditions. One Saturday morning, I was pruning the hedges when Elena came out holding the phone to her chest. "It's Lena," she said, eyes searching mine. I wiped my hands on my jeans, took the phone slowly, and cleared my throat. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I almost hung up. Then came her voice, soft but rushed. "Hey, I know it's been a while. I didn't want things to end that way. I've just been figuring things out." I stayed silent. She continued, "I have a job interview next week. Big firm. They know you. Actually, they're close friends with one of your old business partners. I was wondering if you could make a call. Just put in a word for me." That was it. No apology. No reflection. Just a request, clean and convenient. I waited a few seconds before responding. Let the silence stretch until it said everything I couldn't. "You want me to call a man I haven't spoken to in years? Vouch for someone who doesn't even see me as a parent?" Her voice tightened. "It's not like that, Dad. This is my future. I've worked hard." I cut her off gently. "So did I. For 20 years. I showed up for you in ways you'll never understand. And you thanked everyone else like I was a delivery guy dropping off tuition checks." She tried to respond, but I kept going. "You made it very clear, Lena. I was just the provider. So go ask the people who lifted you up. Let them open the door." She went quiet. "You're really going to let pride get in the way of my future?" she finally said, disbelief dripping from her tone. I laughed bitterly. "No, I'm going to let your choices carry their weight for once. That's not pride. That's boundaries." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from clarity. It was the first time in years I'd said what I truly felt without trying to soften it for her sake. Elena came over and wrapped her arms around me without asking any questions. We didn't speak of it again. There was nothing left to say. That moment marked a turning point for me, not just with Lena, but with myself. I realized how much of my life had been spent in the shadows of people I loved, thinking that if I just gave enough, money, time, silence, they'd eventually see me. But love given under the condition of being noticed is still love wasted if it's not returned. I wasn't just a background character in Lena's life. I was a man who gave up his entire storyline hoping to be written into hers. And I was done with that. Done begging. Done chasing. Done performing. The next few weeks were oddly liberating. I started waking up without a pit in my stomach. I poured my coffee slowly. I took morning walks with Elena. We'd stop by the bakery on 5th Street and sit by the window with croissants and quiet smiles. I started tending to my garden more seriously, even built a small greenhouse in the backyard. For the first time in decades, my time felt like mine. Elena and I talked about travel plans. She mentioned Paris. I said Italy. We compromised on both. We started living, not just surviving. There were no big declarations, no dramatic transformations. Just steady, calm days with someone who never once made me question my place in her world. One evening, we were having dinner, grilled salmon, asparagus, red wine, when she looked up and said, "You know, you've always been more than enough." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, because anything I said would have come out like a sob or a whisper. And maybe that's what healing sounds like. Less noise, more truth. That night, we danced in the living room to old Motown songs, the kind my parents used to play. Elena laughed when I tripped over my own feet. I dipped her anyway. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Still got it, old man." I smiled so hard my face hurt. But Lena's shadow still hovered now and then. A mutual friend told me she didn't get the job, that she was angry, that she thought I'd changed. I laughed when I heard that. I hadn't changed. I'd just stopped pretending her indifference didn't break me. And isn't that the cruelest irony? People push you to your edge and then get shocked when you finally build a fence. I wasn't cruel to Lena. I didn't blacklist her or trash her name. I simply stepped back. I chose peace over proximity. I chose myself, something I hadn't done in a very long time. One afternoon, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in her handwriting. Inside was a brief note. I was angry. I still am. But I get it now. Maybe not fully, but more than before. Oh, there was no apology. No "love you, Dad." Just a crack in the wall. I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a drawer next to the old photos of her as a child. I didn't reach out. I didn't reply. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let someone figure out the weight of their own silence. It was a Tuesday. One of those heavy, gray-skied afternoons where the clouds hang low like they're carrying bad news. I had just come in from the greenhouse, my hands still stained with soil, when I saw her standing at the end of the driveway. Lena. For a moment, I thought it was a hallucination. She was dressed in a blazer and jeans, her hair pulled back like she was coming from a meeting or trying to look composed. But the way she clutched her car keys in both hands told a different story. Nervous. Hesitant. I didn't say anything. I just stared. She raised a hand in a half wave, then dropped it like she wasn't sure it was welcome. Elena came to the door behind me and paused, sensing the shift in air. "Do you want me to go inside?" she asked softly. I nodded, kissed her temple, and stepped out into the driveway. My daughter didn't move. Neither did I. "You look good," she said after a beat, eyes flicking to the greenhouse behind me. "Didn't know you liked gardening." I shrugged. "Didn't know you noticed." That stopped her. She exhaled, nodded slowly, and looked down at her shoes. "I guess I haven't noticed much. That's kind of why I came." I motioned to the porch. We sat on opposite ends of the bench, like two people at a bus stop, waiting on different rides. She fidgeted, then finally looked at me. I was angry. "At graduation, I thought you didn't care about the emotional stuff. That you were just around for the logistics. The money. The structure. But the feelings? I didn't think you did feelings." I didn't respond. "Not yet." She went on. "But these last few months, I've been thinking about all the ways you showed up. The sacrifices. The fact that I never worried about bills, about food, about safety. I don't think I realized how heavy that was until I had to start carrying my own weight." I studied her face. She still had that sharp jawline she inherited from me, but her eyes were softer now, rimmed with regret instead of resentment. "And what made you realize all this?" I asked. Not accusatory, just curious. She smiled bitterly. "Getting turned down for the third job I thought I was perfect for. Living in an apartment I can barely afford. Calling mom and being told to figure it out like everyone else. And then, just sitting there, broke and alone, realizing the only person who ever made sure I never felt that way was the one I took for granted. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted that swelling sense of justice, of finally being seen. But all I felt was tired. Not because I didn't care, but because it took her pain to understand mine. And something about that just felt too little, too late. "I don't hate you," I said after a long pause. "But I can't pretend nothing happened either. I spent 20 years breaking my back to build you a life your mother walked away from. And when it came time to speak my name in front of the world, you erased me." She flinched. "I didn't mean to." I nodded. "I know, but you did." She wiped her eyes quickly, like she didn't want me to see. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I don't know if I even can." I looked out at the street, the same road I used to walk with her when she was 5, her tiny hand gripping my pinky. "It's not about fixing it. It's about owning it. You made choices. I made mine. And now we live with them." Her voice cracked. "So that's it. You're just done with me." I shook my head. No, but I'm done begging for a seat in your life. I gave you all I had, Lena. I won't keep knocking on a door you only open when you need something. She stayed for dinner. Elena cooked roast chicken and potatoes. The conversation was stilted, surface level. Lena asked about our upcoming trip to Italy, commented on how the house looked brighter. I could tell she felt like a guest in her childhood home. And maybe that was fitting. You can't ignore someone's presence for years and expect to walk back into their life like nothing happened. I didn't shut her out. I just stopped handing her keys she kept misplacing. After dinner, she stood at the doorway for a long time, holding her purse like it might hold answers. If I call, will you answer? She asked. Sometimes, I said. If I feel like it. She nodded, a sad smile on her lips. Fair enough. And then she left. No drama. No grand reconciliation. Just two people carrying the weight of everything that hadn't been said over the years. Later that night, Elena and I sat on the couch, a quiet movie playing in the background. She reached for my hand. You did good today, she said. You didn't make her the villain. And you didn't make yourself a martyr. I looked at her and realized how much of my healing had come from her steady presence. Elena never asked to be my daughter's mother. She never asked for credit. She just showed up, every day, every year, every moment. And now, she was the one I chose. Not because Lena had hurt me, but because Elena had never stopped loving me, even when I was hard to love. There's something sacred in that kind of loyalty, something I no longer take for granted. The next week, I got another letter from Lena. No envelope this time, just a folded piece of notebook paper left in the mailbox. You're right. I wasn't fair. I let my mom rewrite the past because it was easier than admitting I was angry she left. And you were just the closest one to blame. But I see it now. You were never absent. You were just tired. I'm sorry, Dad. I read the letter twice, then slid it into a drawer. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some apologies are meant to be received, not returned. I didn't forgive her fully, not yet, but I let go of the bitterness. There's a difference. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes that peace doesn't come from being loved by everyone. It comes from being loved right by even just one. For me, that realization didn't crash in all at once. It came slowly, over cups of morning coffee shared in quiet kitchens, over calloused hands meeting soft ones across the garden bed, and in the knowing silence of a woman who never needed a spotlight to be seen. Elena wasn't my plan B. She wasn't someone I settled for when the person I thought I'd spend my life with walked out. She was the one who stayed. The one who watched me fall apart at 2 in the morning and didn't flinch. The one who helped raise my daughter without ever claiming a title. The one who gave without keeping score. And at 62, standing beside her in the garden, pruning dead leaves from a vine we'd both nurtured, I knew I had finally made the right choice. Not in her, but in myself. We married in the backyard on a brisk Sunday morning. No fanfare, no white dress or tuxedo. Just linen, sunlight, and a handful of people who had seen our love grow through seasons of heartbreak and healing. My best friend Peter, now retired and grayer than ever, officiated. Elena cried when I read my vows, not because they were poetic, but because they were honest. I told her I had spent the first half of my life chasing approval and the second half learning to stop. I told her that her love had been the steady drumbeat under all my chaos, that she never needed to fix me, only to believe I could fix myself. Lena wasn't there. I didn't expect her to be, and oddly, I didn't feel her absence the way I thought I would. The people who needed to be there were, and that was enough. After the wedding, we took our trip to Italy. We strolled through cobbled streets in Florence, ate too much pasta in Naples, and sat on the edge of Lake Como watching boats cut through the blue like time itself. One evening, while sipping wine under a string of lights on a restaurant patio, Elena looked at me and said, "You smile more now." I hadn't realized I did, but she was right. Something had lifted. Something I'd been dragging for decades. Maybe guilt, maybe grief, maybe just the quiet pain of never being fully seen. I had let it go, not because I stopped caring about my daughter, but because I stopped needing her validation to feel whole. When we returned, there was another letter waiting in the mail. This one was different, heavier, thicker, more carefully written. It wasn't from Lena, but from her stepfather, Jason. The same man who'd sat next to Claire at that graduation and soaked in applause for a role he hadn't earned. I know I'm not your favorite person, the letter began, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw this away. But I wanted you to know that Lena has started therapy. She's unpacking a lot. Things her mother and I didn't handle right. Things we should have been more honest about. She talks about you often. Not with anger anymore. With guilt. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I didn't know how to feel. Not angry, not satisfied, just surprised. Surprised that someone who had every reason to stay quiet chose, instead, to tell me something I hadn't expected to hear. I didn't reply. I didn't feel the need to. I simply took that letter and placed it beside the others in my drawer. A quiet collection of truths that had taken too long to arrive. That weekend, Elena and I hosted a small dinner for some friends. The house was warm with conversation, laughter, and the smell of roasted rosemary chicken. Just as we were pouring wine, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lena standing there, a small plant in her hands. "For your greenhouse," she said, almost shy. I took it wordlessly and stepped aside. She joined us for dinner. Didn't dominate the room. Didn't make a speech. Just helped clear the plates, complimented the food, laughed at Peter's old man jokes. And when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, she asked if she could talk. We sat on the porch. The same porch where she once told me I was just the money. The same porch where I once watched her walk away. She stared into the dark yard, then said, "I'm still angry at Mom." I didn't respond. She kept going. "She told me you left. Said you checked out. That you didn't care." And I believed her because that's what I needed to believe to stay close to her. She turned to me, eyes wet but steady. "But I've been reading old emails. Receipts. Talking to people. And I know better now." "I do." My throat tightened. I nodded slowly. "That took courage," I said. She reached into her bag and handed me a small box. Inside was the drawing she made when she was 6, the one with me, her, and Elena as stick figures. "I found it in my old school stuff," she said. "I thought you should have it back." I stared at it, heartbreaking and mending at the same time. She didn't ask me for anything that night. No favors. No forgiveness. Just time. And I gave it, not because she earned it yet, but because I finally had enough of it to offer. Lena and I weren't fixed. There were cracks that would never seal completely. But we were no longer pretending the damage wasn't there. We were naming it, facing it. And sometimes, that's enough to start something new. That night, as Elena and I climbed into bed, I held the drawing in my hand. She looked at me and smiled. "So she's coming back?" I thought for a second, then replied, "Maybe." Slowly. "But this time, I'm not waiting at the door. She knows the way. If she wants to be part of this life, she'll knock. And I'll decide if I want to open it." Elena nodded and turned off the light. And in the quiet that followed, I lay there feeling more whole than I'd ever felt in my life. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally stopped begging to be chosen and started choosing myself. Have you ever given everything to someone, only to be erased from the version of their story they chose to tell? This isn't just about a father and daughter. It's about what it costs to be the one who stayed, the one who gave, the one who loved quietly. Sometimes, the real victory isn't getting the credit. It's walking away with your peace intact. If this story struck a chord, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in telling the hard truths about family, love, and boundaries, like, share, and subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. See you soon in the next one.